The Development Bank of Jamaica, Jamaica Venture Capital Program, and Caribbean Alternative Investment Association present a weekly webinar series, Building the Economy through Alternative Investments.
The topic for today's session is private credit. My name is Kareem Tomlinson, and I'll be a moderator for today's session. With me, we put together a panel of very high-powered speakers. To my immediate right is Mr. Reynaldo Thompson. To his right is Mr. Berisford Gray, and even further to his right, Mr. Nicholas Scott. I'll share a little bit about myself, and then I'll invite my panelists to do the same. So while not moderating panels such as this, I work with the JMMB group. I'm currently the general manager for JMMB Securities Limited. JMMB has been very, very supportive and encouraging of the DBJ in its efforts to firstly establish the private equity and venture capital ecosystem. You know, and that was some 5-6 years ago, and where we are now, that's morphed into a much bigger and broader establishment of the alternative investments ecosystem. So it's very heartening for us to be a part of this, to sit here and see where we are, where we're having forums like this, where we're seeing a bunch of investors, you know, sophisticated investors such as the Sagicors of this world, having great allocations in their portfolios to alternative investments, where we're seeing, you know, a number of different alternative investment vehicles popping up. My shameless plug here is that JMMB Group will also be entering the space soon and very soon with the launch of its own private equity fund. You know, it's also very encouraging to see that we have an emerging group of high potential entrepreneurs who are coming to the fore, which all augur well for the ecosystem which the DBJ has done so well to create. So just want to pause to big up the DBJ, Audrey and her team for the work they've done in getting us to this point, and want to also recognize the career for taking the baton and running with this chapter. And you know, I'm sure that in another 5 to 6 years we will similarly be looking at the advancements that we have made from today's date. So without further ado, I will probably just ask my panelists to hand over, and then I'll take it back over and we can go through.
All right. Good morning, guys. I'm Reynaldo Thompson from Sagicor Investments. We are very happy to be here. Happy to be a part of the initiative to move the needle in terms of where capital is invested in Jamaica. We're very appreciative of what the work that DBJ has been doing over the last couple of years to get it to this point. I think, as Kareem said, in the next 5 years, it'll be very important to look back at the progress that we have made. And I think we will be making a lot of progress over the next 5 years. From Sagicor investment perspective, we're already in the space. We've been in the space since 2012. We're looking to further deepen our participation in private equity and how it is that we can help companies to transition from being small to medium to larger companies. So we're very, as I said before, very happy to what DBJ has been doing. And what we're trying to do is to just complement that. And that's why we're very happy to be a part of the panelists today.
Yeah, thanks, Reynaldo. And good morning, everyone. I'm Berisford from Sygnus Group. Sygnus is a leader in the alternative investment space in the Caribbean. And we started about 3 years ago. And since then, we have deepened our platform to offer private equity, private credit, and real estate financing, all in the private, I would say, alternative investment space. We believe a lot in the growth of this channel, and we believe that with this channel, we can actually complement the traditional financing channel in the region and enhance the growth of businesses and expand the economies. So Sygnus spends a lot of time looking at different asset allocation, whether it's private equity, private credit, or real estate financing, and figuring out how we can be creative to help businesses and help the channel to grow. I will also recognize the DBJ and other players in the channel who have worked very hard over the last couple of years to ensure that Jamaica and I would say the wider Caribbean start having a proper alternative investment channel. And I think finally we are very proud to be a member of the Caribbean Alternative Investment Association. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Nicholas Scott. I'm the Chief Investment Officer of the Musson Group. I'm also the Managing Director of Eppley Limited. Eppley is an alternative investment vehicle. We were pioneers in this space in the Caribbean. We started out in credit on our own balance sheet and expanded that through funds that we manage. And today we also manage the largest real estate mutual fund in the Caribbean, and we also have an infrastructure investment program. We're delighted to be on the panel, and like the other panelists, we're very appreciative to the DBJ for the work that they've done in building this ecosystem. What I would say is, at a time like this, when COVID has impacted us, I think the DBJ and all of us will reap the rewards of the hard work that we've done. It is alternative managers like ourselves that are likely to act the fastest, to be the most flexible, and to provide access to capital at a time when it's badly needed. And so we'd also like to thank the DBJ for the work that they've done, and we look forward to a good discussion this morning.
All right, so thank you guys. So, as we progress over the next, 40 minutes or so, we'll explore private credit a little bit more. What exactly is private credit? How does it benefit the companies who get investments via the form of private credit? The importance of the private credit markets to the regional economies within which we operate. And in this time, it would be remiss of us to have any sort of discussion on this forum without touching on the impact of COVID-19 on all of this, and how it's changed what we do, how it will change what we do going forward, how it will impact businesses, and why now more than ever businesses should in fact be exploring private credit solutions to finance their business needs. And it was pause to recognize that as panelists here, we are in fact recognizing all the established social distancing protocols. I was almost run out of the room. Actually, I was run out of the building this morning for having my mask, leaving my mask in the car. So we really are truly, in fact, being safe, and we encourage you to do the same. So, with all the pleasantries out of the way, I think it's time to jump straight into it. Right. So, I will do the first question I think that is appropriate for us to start off with is, what is private credit? I'll probably throw this one out to Beris to kickstart us.
Yeah, thank you, Kareem. So yeah, private credit actually has its genesis in the US back in the late 80s, and primarily because you had a situation where you had banking crisis and you needed alternative investors who are more flexible to support businesses, and so they sort of evolve out of that with proper regulations and so forth. And so what private credit does sort of balloon globally and become this asset class. Fundamentally, private credit is any form of credit that is non-traditional, primarily the traditional being bonds and bank financing. Bonds mean big bonds placed in the capital markets, whether it's private debt market or the public debt market, and bank financing, everyone would be familiar with that. Private credit is from a pool of investor or near bank or non-bank entities that are looking at financing debt type instrument in a more flexible, creative solution that is many times seek to align a lot with the financing strategy of an entity. So generally a private credit is executed through a non-bank platform.
So relative to traditional banking, what would be the benefit to a company of taking on private credit as opposed to more traditional forms of financing?
Okay. Yeah. So typically, and if we look at the Caribbean market has been dominated primarily by the bank market, and in more recent time, Jamaica and Trinidad would have had I would say, fledgling debt capital markets. Debt capital markets is basically where you issue bonds for large corporates. In those scenarios, you typically have very straight jacket type, so to speak, financing, where, for example, in the bank market, you would have to have 5-year financing, which is amortizing, or in the bond market, generally, it's a 5-year balloon transaction. And amortizing, I would say, in the less developed markets. In the private credit space, what you try to do is offer instruments which are flexible in both cash flow demands on the company, as well as amount of financing that is needed and type of financing. What do I mean by that? For example, in the private credit space, a company might be seeking working capital line. Normally, in the traditional market, that working capital line would be in the form of an overdraft facility. In the private credit market, this working capital line could be in the form of inventory financing, receivable financing. So it's solving the same need in terms of allowing the company to grow, but it has different implication for their balance sheet. Another example could be a company could be seeking to finance a equipment, which is a capex financing. Typically in the traditional market, you'd get a 5-year or 3-year, whatever it might be, amortizing facility. In the private credit market, you might end up with pref share to do that instrument, to be the instrument. Both are could be medium term in terms of financing tenor, but again, the pref share will not amortize, so that saves the company a lot of cash flow. So that type of flexibility.
Right, so Nick Beris mentioned a few things like the bond markets. There's also the very hot now in Jamaica are the IPO markets. There are a number of financing opportunities, and each all have the various benefits. Where does private credit fit within the capital structure of a company seeking financing?
I think if it's done well, what we try to do is to be the best of both worlds. So one to add to something Barry said, I think one way to define private credit is people who extend credit but look at that investment the way an equity investor would. And so many times the transactions that we work on sit right in the middle of the capital structure, and they will offer the benefits of equity. So for example, the bank will take comfort in the fact that there's more capital behind them and supported in the business in the same way someone would if they raise equity privately or through an IPO. And they would share in risk in the same way that if someone chose to raise capital in an IPO or to raise money privately, they would be sharing risk. But it has benefits to the company that debt has as well, depending on how it's structured, where people can retain control and voting control, which is sometimes very important. And they can also save on all of the regulatory costs and all of the disclosure costs and governance costs of going public. And that could be a stepping stone to becoming more institutional. And so many times we find ourselves acting as a tool to solve a problem. And when we hit the sweet spot, we've given all the advantages to the company that equity does, that I just described, while allowing them to preserve those things. And so it's really not a substitute for any of them. It's just every problem has an optimal solution, and in many cases that means coming to an Eppley, coming to a Sygnus for these types of investments.
So we've heard some of the perspectives shared from Eppley and Sygnus, who are two I would say fund managers in the space. Reynaldo, you wear a slightly different hat in that you represent a portfolio, a multi-billion-dollar portfolio that makes investments in the asset class. Why is it important for entities such as a Sagicor to have an allocation to alternative investments and specifically to private credit?
Right. Well, I want to look at it in a broader sphere, right? So we do some private credit, but I'd want to look at it from a private financing, meaning that we look at private credit as well as private equity as well. Gotcha. The truth is that we have a very long-term view, right? And in our long-term view, what it means is that we want to be able to be a part of the process, the value creation process, in Jamaica. So in doing that, what we say is that we have this pool of capital that we manage. And yes, we need to make a return on it for our investors, but we also need to be able to channel a portion of it to the long term. In other words, channel a portion of it, take on a little bit more risk. And so that's why we entered into the private financing space, right? Now that we're in the private financing space, what we're trying to say is, how is it that we can help people and businesses achieve what they want to achieve, achieve their goals, and by extension make Jamaica, better in the future. And so we look at various characteristics or components, its characteristics. So what are the components that attract us to that market?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, when we're investing, we want to ensure that we're investing in a company that is scalable, and that the business is sustainable. Where in the capital structure we fall, is largely dependent on the company that we're looking at. Of course, in some instances it might be private equity.
Mm-hmm.
In some instances it might be private credit. And we do this directly in companies, but we also partner with other PE firms, because the truth is, while we have some capital that we manage, we want to be able to make Jamaica better, and different. For example, Sygnus will have eyes on different things that Sagicor doesn't have.
Mm-hmm.
Eppley might have eyes on different aspects of the economy that Sagicor doesn't have. So we're willing to partner with different entities to achieve that bigger goal.
So Reynaldo mentioned scalability and sustainability as two of the things that Sagicor look for in investing in an investee company. Beris, can you share just what are some of the traits or the characteristics or the things you look for in a company in evaluating whether it's a good investment for you to make a private credit injection?
So when we look at a company, we look at a number of things, but in a nutshell, a private credit investor is really looking at the company from one, where are they in terms of their historical performance.
Mm-hmm.
So we look at their historical financials and their leverage level, and then we of course look at what are the drivers of revenue and what are the core sustainability, what you call the core of the business. That's something which is very important for us. When we're looking at a firm, we want to dissect it to make sure that we understand what is the core. The core from our point of view is what is it that this company does that it can do better than most competitor. Or we'll be happy if it does it better than everybody else, right? So that's the product, service, or something that you do. And the reason why that is important, to tie it back to what Nick said, as a private credit investor, you have to also think about the business sort of, would you invest equity in this firm?
Mm-hmm.
And if the company has a strong core, you can bet that there might be sustainable revenue. So you can then say, okay, I can then take, go right in the middle, so to speak, of
Mm-hmm.
the capital structure, right above equity investor, because this business have a potential to have sustainable revenue. Apart from that, of course, we look at the management team, which is
Mm-hmm.
very important. From our point of view, we always boil down to some basic credit principle. When you lend or invest in a company in the way we do as private credit investor, you're really investing in the management team. That's really the core.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a management team that can deliver and who are full of integrity, then you are going to have problems. So the management team, the caliber of that team is very important. And of course you have the secondary ways out that, in some instances we look at the level of collateral and those type of things. But that's our secondary way out. Our first way out is really the core of the business, the management team, and the ability to drive revenue.
Nick, would it be similar for you, or are there anything you want to add?
I would just add that the shorthand way for us, and this is for all of the businesses or entrepreneurs, that are seeking capital would be if ever you find yourself in a situation where you can't understand why the traditional system won't finance you, and there's a problem that's common sense, but the reason you're not getting financed is regulatory or bureaucratic, that is the ideal sweet spot. So we, like Beris, like businesses that have sound economics, but may have circumstances that are specific that we can understand why they're capital constrained. And we view our role as providing capital there. So we're interested in broken capital structures, not broken businesses. And it's very important to tell the difference between the two. But we find that there's lots of opportunities in our region where there are very strong businesses with really good business plans and management that for whatever reason, for bad timing, or because their business is hard to understand, find themselves having a difficulty getting financing from a bank or a traditional institution. That is really the sweet spot for Eppley, and that's where we've had success in the past.
So in a number of other forums, we would have heard that, the access to capital for companies that, of the size that we're looking on is a huge contributor to growth. What role does private credit play in generating economic growth for the economies in which we operate? And this is an open question to any of the panelists who wants to start. I'd love to hear the perspective from each of the three of you.
Yeah, so let me see if I can enter the first swing at it. So there's two sides to it, right? So there's the side that Beris and Nick just speak about in terms of the type of company and what is it that they're looking for in that company to invest in, right? But then the other side of it is what it is that we are bringing. We as private financiers are bringing to this company. And yeah, the company is strong, but you probably just need financing. So yeah, the first thing that we're bringing is financing. But oftentimes, it's not just financing alone that the company needs. What it also needs is the expertise, that we bring. So for example, corporate governance, that's a big thing. And what you find is that most of these, small and medium enterprises, the corporate governance is not there. And we know how crucial that can be in terms of, one step further to bringing them forward. So, the corporate governance is one. In addition to that, is that with our financing, we can also help with, helping to create, the marketing of whatever product that they are selling. So, we can bring them to our next level to showcase their product. And that brings me to the third point, which is, the network. So, yes, it is true that, we have the financing, but what is also critical for some of these small companies is the network that they can get from us. So, for example, we can take a wellness company, and because of our relationship with the insurance and make that wellness company benefit. We can take a tour operator and link it with a hotel operation, because of the network and the linkages that we bring. So in terms of private financing space, it's important that persons don't just see it as just the money, because the money is important, you need that, but what else comes with it, and it's the expertise that sometimes is a game changer.
Same question to you, Beris. The role of private credit in creating the growth of the economy.
So Sygnus is very passionate about that. In fact, our vision is to drive the velocity of economic growth across the Caribbean using creative financing solution. And the creative financing solution which we embark on is the alternative investment space. Consequently, a lot of our activity, especially our private credit investment fund, Sygnus Credit Investment, focuses a lot on the medium-sized sector. And the reason we did that was when we researched the market in Jamaica in particular and the wider Caribbean, the access to capital at the time, 3 years ago, when you think about loanable funds in the economy, only 27% of that went to medium-sized firms. Small business was like 13%, and the rest went to the large companies. When we contrast that with Europe and North America, the reverse was true, where you have a lot more funds going to the medium-sized sector relative to the large companies. And so we conclude that, well, and with other economic research, medium-sized segment generally, well, in the case of Jamaica, and in most economy employ the most persons, and out of the medium-sized space you have a lot of big company emerge, right? So we believe then that if we can unlock capital through an alternative channel, which is really what we are doing every ourselves, Sagicor is unlocking capital to flow into businesses through an alternative channel. We see that as really a great impetus into allowing companies who otherwise could not have access capital in a different form to access capital and expand their business. So if you think about what private credit does, private credit then is just a complement to the traditional financing. So if you think about credit as a spectrum, you will have at the top of that spectrum in terms of, say you have a spectrum of credit and each credit have a particular habitat. You would have the traditional financing typically need comfort and senior habitat and a low return. And as a consequence, it tried to solve very standard issues as Nick indicated. Then you would have a little bit down that spectrum, you would have the private credit that is not afraid to be uncomfortable. It will take on more risk, and to Reynaldo's point, by taking on more risk, it will work closer with the entrepreneur to help grow the business and protect the capital. So by taking on more risk and working closer with entrepreneurs and using creative structures, which I think we'll talk about and Nick can elaborate on some of them, we are able to bring different type of solution to medium-sized firm, and that we, in our case, we have funded more than 30 companies since we started, and we have seen tremendous growth in a lot of them in terms of employment and support. So we are very convinced about what we are doing and how private credit contributes to economic growth.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize the context that we're having this discussion, where we were always focused on the importance of access to capital, and that maybe has been historically true for small and medium-sized businesses. But today, I think we're in a situation where, because of COVID, there's going to be, and we've already seen a risk aversion emerge on the part of traditional institutions, and for good reason. Many of these institutions are managing deposits, for example, or insurance funds, and so I think it's probably prudent and appropriate for there to be a higher risk aversion there. But unfortunately, what we need now in Jamaica and in the region is a very quick response, a very decisive response, and a response that meets the moment. And I believe that's most likely to come from the alternative channel. And I think that's good for Jamaica, that's good for the businesses, that's good for the traditional system, because it means that there's going to be more liquidity and more capital. But I think our role is more important than ever. And I think we, as a community and as a subsector, have a big role to play in catalyzing a recovery in Jamaica, and that's even more so in the Eastern Caribbean and elsewhere in the region.
Okay, let me throw one more point into that, just to add on to what Nick was saying. I think, one of the things, and I think, as time passes, we'll assess it more, is how we measure the impact of the investment that we're making. And when I say impact, meaning how is it that we achieve some of the development goals that Jamaica set for itself, or even the higher ones that the UN set for Jamaica. So it is true that our first goal as private financiers, our first goal is to ensure that we're making a return on the investment that we make. And so we have to ensure that that's there first. But along with that is the impact that the financing is having. How much, how is it that we're causing this business to grow and employing more persons, getting more females in the workforce, that kind of thing. Reducing the hunger and providing just basic amenities for persons in the community. That's also big in terms of how we see things from the private financing space. So yes, we need to make a return, and yes, we're evaluating businesses so that we can help them to transition. But one of the criteria that we also have is the impact that we're having in the space that we're invested in.
So Nick could have touched on the impact of COVID-19 and what a response needs to be from the private credit markets. But I'd love to also just explore a little bit more what's been the impact of COVID-19, on specific elements within the specific stakeholders within the private credit market. So I don't know, Beres, if you'd be able to share some context as to what's happening with COVID-19 as it relates to globally, where we are, and how is that shaping up for us?
Yeah, thanks much, Kareem. Well, COVID-19, is one of these phenomenal events that sort of, you can't really plan for. I think that in our world, we were anticipating a downturn in the market. So, when we think strategically about how we see the world, we would have thought about a worst case scenario. To be honest, it was more driven by a fall off in asset prices, right? Yeah, sort of a financial bubble fall off in asset prices, and then you could think about how you manage that scenario. We didn't really envision a global compression in economic activity due to a health crisis. So currently, what we notice in Jamaica and in the private credit portfolio, including ours, is that a lot of clients, especially clients in the hospitality industry, would have overnight basically end up with a business that has a good infrastructure but no revenue. We see that right across the hospitality industry, right across the Caribbean, and then also, of course, persons in the restaurant businesses and other businesses. Majority of business except food distribution and essential services, maybe pharmacies and medical supplies, for a while had no business activities. What that really means is that when as private credit investors, then we have to, what you really have to do is take a top-down approach, start looking at, which businesses are going to be impacted immediately and most severely, and are these businesses in a position to come back at some point? And then, of course, on the other hand, you have businesses which you have to look at and say, which business needs support to supply essential services? Because many times those are the type of some businesses in our portfolio. So we have a mixture of businesses that have different needs. So what we did at Sygnus is to rationalize our portfolio by looking at these two sets of businesses. And of course, you have businesses that it will have very little impact, or the impact will be at the back end. So what we did was to rationalize our portfolio along those lines and identify who, for example, we need to support in order to supply, for example, foods and medical supplies. So those companies, we have to think about increasing their working capital line to support demand. Food distribution business, for example. And the other hand, businesses in the hospitality sector are, let me say, linkage in industry. Then those we have to assess and really get a good handle of how the COVID-19 impact them and what's their outlook in terms of timeline to return to normal, revenue. Whether it's 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months, and then we have to look at the specific type of need. And this is where private credit become very important, because as private credit investors, we can really customize the solution a little bit more than the traditional market.
I'm going to pause at that point, Beres, and I'm going to throw it out to Nick. So Nick, Beres mentioned there are companies that have good business infrastructure still in place, but the revenues would have fallen to naught or next to naught. You know, how important are, you know, tailor-made structures for these companies to not only survive the current pandemic environment, but to ensure that they are back on a trajectory of thriving post-pandemic.
Yeah, so I think it's our job to differentiate between a business that's broken and a capital structure that's broken. And that is where our skill comes in. And if you believe that this crisis has any feature that is time-bound, then that there's a possibility that there's a lot of opportunities in the first category. And we're seeing that, and we're actively deploying that. Unfortunately, there are some casualties that I think will have some longer-term effects. I think it's important that we recognize that. But I think there's one message I would want to make sure to convey to those that are listening, which is that the best time to invest in this asset class is at this point in the cycle. I mean, when we started at really Eppley in earnest, it was in 2013. Most of the pension funds, most of the insurance companies, they didn't want to deploy credit, they wanted to invest in government securities. Many institutions that are doing it now didn't do it at all, and we saw very wide credit spreads, and we had some of the highest returns. You know, the month before COVID was probably the riskiest time. The least risky time is now, where everyone is completely aware of every risk. There's a dearth of capital. People don't have a lot of alternatives. Unfortunately, I'm a bit concerned that the people who fund us tend to have exactly the opposite reaction at this time. They are sitting on investment committees where they're looking at numbers that have brackets around them, and the same people that were gung-ho at exactly the worst time are now have a lot of reticence. And as a community, I think it's our job to point people to the historical example, not just in Jamaica, but as a global phenomenon, and to ask them not to be reckless, to be incredibly careful, but to sit with us as managers and understand that the dynamics now and the credit spreads in our subsector, and remember, it's at a time like this, Kareem, that you would prefer to own something that's more senior in the capital structure, that has collateral, that has infrastructure, that has assets, and that is not marketable and does not have mark-to-market. You know, each stakeholder has been impacted. There are good opportunities and bad ones, but writ large, I think this is a time that for me as a manager is relatively attractive, even though that may be a contrarian position.
So I think you know, from our perspective, as I said before, what we're trying to turn the dial a bit, because oftentimes, you know, most of the pools of capital that we manage essentially plays in a more safer part of the market, where, you know, it essentially wants a return, and it wants a return now, and it wants to ensure that, you know, the capital itself is safe. But we're turning the needle. We're turning the needle to the point where we're now, you know, taking a portion of that capital that we manage to put towards some of these risk assets. In other words, you know, we won't get immediate returns on some of these capital that we're now deploying, but the return is in the future. And that's how we look at it. Because as I said, we have a long-term view, and we have to find a way to ensure that, you know, we encourage business to continue to operate, because there will become a time when COVID will be behind us. You know, the question out there is when. But then even after that point, going forward, then we'll have businesses that are thriving, that we would have invested in during this period where it is relatively cheap.
Yeah, I would like to just add to what Nick said, and you know, and I think he made a very good point, and you know, I think this is really a time to call on the institutional and private investors who have invested and see alternative investment in the Caribbean as a sustainable and attractive asset class, to really understand what's going on in the global market. In the global market, alternative investment vehicles, whether it's in Europe or in North America, are raising tremendous amount of capital. You know, so between private equity, private credit, special situation funds, they are raising, you know, billions of capital. As a matter of fact, one of the largest raise was done a few weeks ago, 18 billion by a French private equity fund? Why are pension funds and other institutional funds going into alternative asset during this time? It's exactly what Nick is saying, because alternative assets are going to be the asset class or the investors who one have the skill set to dissect, and I take Nick's term, broken capital structure, dissect businesses that are very strong fundamentally and take the right step in terms of risk mitigation and investment strategy and using the right investment tool. For example, an alternative investment manager who is a private credit investor like ourselves will look at a great business that is going through COVID and will use a debt instrument that give us the right to own, i.e. give us upside in the equity of the business in another few years. And that would mean tremendous return for our investors. If that business would not be attractive for our investors or even ourselves 6 months ago or a year ago, or it could be well, it could be available but at a very high premium. The entrepreneur owning that business would not necessarily need the type of solution that we will bring to them today, 6 months ago, but today we will bring the solution that no one else is bringing. So it's very important that institutional investors understand that if you really want to enjoy the type of returns that global investors enjoy and really contribute to building a strong and robust alternative investment platform in the region, you should not be timid about investing in alternative vehicles now.
So thanks for that, Bears. So you touched on some of the type of instruments that you could use, where you say you put in debt and it converts into equity and some funky stuff. I wanted to hear a little bit more about what type of structures are encapsulated under the term private credit. If you can share a little bit more with persons who are looking, who are not as familiar with how these things work, why they work.
Okay.
So sorry, I'll just ask, you need to share that question,
Yeah, I'll take a few. So I will use the word funky. They are just really, I think they are just customized. We like the word customized, right? It's like, like you go to...
Like the suit you have on.
Yeah, like my suit, it's very customized, it's built to fit.
Tailor-made.
Yeah, tailor-made. So that's the term that we use. So when we think about investing in a company, and as we said earlier, when you think fundamentally, you also have to think about your exit and think about total return and think about, would you take an equity position in this company? And if the answer to that is yes, then not because you are doing debt, you would really want a solution that give you upside in the equity performance of the business. So some of the structures that we might use, so for example, if a company want to, let's use an example. Suppose a company is going to grow and see another company that it wants to buy, and it's doing an acquisition. And if it's borrowing, say 80%, 70% of the money, but the purchaser only have 15% of equity, then 15 and a percent and 70, that's 85%. They are still 15% short. So a private credit would come in and give, for example, a convertible preference share or what you call a mezz debt. Our convertible preference share work is that I'll come in and say, okay, I'll give you, X $1 million, and I might have a relatively low coupon or dividend payment, and at say year 3, year 5, whenever you convert my pref share into equity. So what happened in that structure is that the debt servicing demand on the business is lower because they don't need to find principal repayment to repay the pref, and at the same time they don't need to, when the bank or the senior lender is looking up the financing, they will treat my pref share as subordinated debt or equity. So that helped to make the transaction easier. So what the solution there is that basically the entrepreneur expand their business with only 15% equity, which is great for them. they double revenue or support. So that's just one structure. I'll let you talk.
So Nick, you mentioned that Eppley's been around since 2013. So it's probably the first, or if not the first, one of the very first funds dedicated to, the private credit space in the region. What's been your experience with some of the structures that you looked at as well? What has worked well, what has not worked so well? You mentioned, the persons that fund you, how they look on things. Sounds like there's room for greater dialogue there. What's been your experience over that period of time?
It's been a great ride. I mean, we're lucky to say that and we're public, and so we look back now over the last 6 years, and people who invested in our IPO, we've compounded that capital for 6 years at 35% a year on average. And we've done that because our fundamental belief is you can get returns adjusted for risk by addressing the inefficiencies that we spent this morning talking about. In terms of some of the products that we've used to do that, it's very much along the line of what Barry said. We look at a situation. First thing we do is identify a problem. So if the problem is, for example, let us say there's an entity that has levered its balance sheet, it's secured its balance sheet, needs more money, but has tied up all of its collateral, then we may lend on an unsecured basis because we believe in the long-term economic viability of the company. Maybe there's a situation where the company needs liquidity, but they have all their working capital lines drawn. We will purchase a receivable from them. Let us say there's an entity that comes to us to borrow, but we really think the value is in the equity. In other words, this company has tremendous potential, then we'll take an equity stake. We've done all of these things, and we try to balance our risk across the gamut. And today, we have a portfolio that's made up of everything I just said, as well as infrastructure and real estate. So that's been our experience since 2013.
All right, sounds good. So in the current environment, are there specific industries that each of you are looking into that you're seeing opportunities? So Berisford, you have mentioned like food distribution as a particular opportunity in the current environment. Are there any others that we're looking to?
Well, we don't really cherry pick industries per se. Again, because we look at customized solutions, so we're not going to look at one industry and just say, oh, that industry is complicated, right? We will look at the individual asset and our business and determine if we can find a solution for the business. But we are seeing tremendous opportunities across different sectors. For example, we are seeing a lot of opportunities right now across the energy sector, across the healthcare sector. We are seeing opportunities in the hospitality sector, to be frank. We are seeing opportunity, of course, in the distribution sector, especially talking about food distribution. There's a lot of opportunities there, whether it's working capital line, commodity financing, etc. So we are seeing quite a few.
Yeah, man.
No. We also see opportunity in the financial services sector as well. But just to say that the key thing is that we have to recognize that we are going through a pandemic crisis, and as a consequence, you have to be very aware of the risk that you are taking, and have to make sure that you do the right analysis. Meaning you don't, people can use FAS data, FAS assumption, and it will make you get very unsatisfactory results. So for us, we have to make sure that we have factual data and take a very realistic view on the opportunity, recognizing that within the crisis there are opportunities, but you need facts to make the right decision. So I don't want that to be lost.
So, see some questions coming through. So Reynaldo, I'm going to pose a second one to you. What is the advantage of private credit given the uncertainty of post-COVID?
Well, I think, with private, as I said, I like to look at it broad as private financing, right? So the advantage is, let's put it in perspective, right? So the truth is, when you have a event like COVID, that essentially changed the dynamics of how the economy operates, what you find is that the traditional source of financing tend to pull back, and I think that's part of what Nick was alluding to earlier, right? So the traditional form of financing will pull back, and rightly so, and it's good reason. They really have depositors' money or investors' money that they can't put at risk, so they have to pull back. Now, from where we sit and the type of capital that we manage or that we want to put at play, it's willing to take on that type of risk, and for companies who at this moment who would have probably have a levered balance sheet, they have too much debt or they have debt relative to their ability to pay it, because of the impact of COVID. Yeah. How is it that we can help, and that's where the private credit comes in. So the private credit, we'll sit down, we can always sit down and discuss how is it that we can finance your current operation, given the risk that is out there, given the current structure, to see how is it that we can help you to pass through COVID so that at the end we're both in a better place. And I think that's how we can use private credit to help businesses.
Good one, thank you for that. So Nick, I see a question here, and for obvious reasons I'm going to throw it at you, the first one. Can one of you explain what is meant by mezzanine financing?
Sure. So mezzanine in a building is between the floor and the ceiling. And so a mezzanine in a capital structure is a place in the capital structure that's in between debt and equity and has the elements of both. So similar to what I mentioned earlier, it probably looks like debt usually in that it has coupon payments that are contractual or at least implied, and it may have a maturity date where you owe back the money, and it may even have some more senior claim. But like equity, it shares in the risk and shares in the upside and may or may not have voting rights. So it's a very flexible form of capital that sits like a mezzanine floor does in a building between debt and equity.
And I saw a question there, and probably I'm going, I'll ask Beris to probably tackle that one. And I think we'd have touched on elements of it before. How do you, in this environment, convince a business to take on, this type of financing?
I would say that so far we don't need to do much convincing. Anyway, I'm just joking. But yeah, I'm sort of serious because remember, entrepreneurs are business people, right? They're very smart people. Okay, an entrepreneur who built a medium-sized firm from scratch. This is not the first crisis that they are going through, right? They have gone through probably many crises, Jamaica crisis, other global crisis, right? So when you go to them and present a solution to say, look, your liquidity. Well, let me say, most entrepreneurs as well who have built business in Jamaica understand liquidity, okay? Cash, they understand that. And when you go to them and say, look, you're in an environment and your sales has fallen off, and they would know that from the numbers, but you know that you have a good product, you have a good business model, but you don't have liquidity now. Liquidity is like water, water the plant. That's how liquidity is to business. You need it to survive, right? Turn off the water, the plant die. So the entrepreneur will recognize when we say, look, we can give you a solution today that will improve your liquidity position. You might have to pay a premium for it, or you might have to have some type of profit kicker in the future. And the entrepreneur will understand that because it is aligned with their long-term view that my business is going through a crisis today, but I'm very convinced that in the future my business will do well. So, you have to, for less sophisticated entrepreneur, we will walk through, but generally they understand it very well.
Okay, thank you for that. I was seeing another question here. We asked Reynaldo to tackle it. What is the key element of Jamaican business mentality that brings obstacles to you in convincing them that private capital has benefits? It's almost similar to the question we just tackled just now, eh? Or I don't know, Reynaldo, you want to share your perspective?
No, I never get to see the question properly. Sorry.
Okay, so that would have been the question above, which was, the mentality of Jamaican business persons. What is it about? what is it like convincing them that taking on external capital is valuable to them?
Yeah, I think part of the challenge that we face for the demand and the financing that we're providing is how we have to get involved with the business, and oftentimes a private company don't necessarily want to share all their secrets, so to speak. So I think that's the first hurdle, because the truth is most businessmen or business person, when they operate in a business, they need financing, they need funding. But to invite a banker or a financier inside here requires opening up the books, opening up the business for scrutiny. And that's the first challenge that most business person want to get over. Just allowing other investors in. I think once you break that barrier, then it becomes how we can sit down to structure a deal that's both beneficial to the investor as well as for the business itself. So I think if we break through the first door, then I think the second door becomes a little bit more easy. But the first one is just opening up private business, so that we can scrutinize it.
Come on. So and it was mentioned earlier that private credit typically takes a little bit more risk than traditional credit. Yeah. And how we help to mitigate some of that risk is by being a little bit more involved in the businesses. So how do not throw it out to Nick Barris, how you deal with instances where you've invested in a company who traditionally a board meeting for them would have been a husband and a wife having dinner. I know you're saying to them, I'm going to tell you that these are some of the things you have to do. Is that a part of the consideration?
In some of our, especially where we invest and we have convertible features, we oftentimes require a board seat. In our experience, I think that some different entrepreneurs behave differently. There are entrepreneurs that, in our experience, welcome the addition of, say, someone from Sygnus on their board, especially when they are thinking about an IPO within a 3 or 4 year period, because they see this as tightening up their governance and sort of renting the business along that line. And there are other investors who you have to do a lot of discussion with, about the courtship to allow them to bring you in on the board would have started before you actually sign the documentation. So by the time you start participating in board meeting, they would have gotten some level of comfort. It's still a little bit uncomfortable to have a third party at the board meeting, but because you have a sort of a long courtship, it does help.
And then you mentioned a long courtship. How long does a typical, and I know there probably is nothing such as a typical private credit deal, but what's the gestation period for a transaction in this space?
Yeah, that's why and I'm sure Nick will say, and Reynaldo, that's why we really enjoy what we do, right? There's nothing typical in our world. A deal can take a week or a few days, to a deal can take 3 months. It all depends.
That's been your experience as well?
We don't have the cheapest cost of capital. That's not a secret. So the reason why we add value is has to be something else, and that could be understanding a business in a way, which is what we just talked about for the last 45 minutes, but it could many times be speed and decisiveness. And certainly at Eppley, our entire business is set up from a governance standpoint and from a financing standpoint and from a regulatory standpoint to allow us to be constrained by our own decision making, and that allows us to act very quickly. And there are circumstances where it's been a week where we've seen an opportunity, we've diligenced it, and we've made a large capital commitment, and people come to us because they know we have a balance sheet and we have the ability to make up our minds, and we're going to be careful, but once we have made up our minds, we're going to act decisively.
So and for viewers who are owners of business contemplating taking on private credit, what would you say to them to get them to for them to get ready to be able to take on this type of an investment?
I can just say that the way we came to this business is at the Musson Group as a conglomerate that financed itself for many years, and Berisford was one of our financiers. We oftentimes found ourselves taking on capital and seeing that traditional capital be very restrictive, and then many times for reasons that we didn't understand, it didn't always enhance their position. And what I would say to the entrepreneurs and business people out there that are trying to trade it off is, what you should look for is not price. What you should look for, as in anything, is a value. And I think what we offer, and specifically at a time like this, where you're not picking up a phone and calling an institution that has many layers, you're picking up a phone and calling someone who's going to answer that, who's been in-depthly involved in your business, who understands it as a partner, and who can give you a decision on how to deal with that. You're going to be very happy. You're not going to think about the fact you're paying an additional 50 or 100 basis points. And so what we really offer is quick decision, tailored service, and a true partner. Whether that's a partner in the form of equity or debt is a detail. It's a stakeholder that's sitting at the table thinking as you are every day about your business, and that's what we offer.
Okay. So I think we have covered quite a bit of ground today. I'd probably just ask each of you in 30 seconds or less to, what's that one parting thing you'd want to leave your viewers with? Beginning, I start with you, Reynaldo, so I'll start with Nick and, work way back.
Okay.
No problem. I would just underscore something I said earlier, which is this is an uncertain time. And in an uncertain time, it often feels like the worst time to invest, but it often is the best time to invest. The alternative asset space generally, and private credit that's deployed at this point in the cycle, will have the highest returns. And so to the institutional investors that are listening to this conversation, Eppley certainly is open for business. We see more attractive opportunities now than we did just before the beginning of the cycle, and we'd like to talk to you about that. For businesses that have been impacted by this, that have traditional banking or other forms of capital, again, Eppley stands ready on our own balance sheet through our funds to support you. We think there is tremendous opportunity in Jamaica and in the region. We have the capacity to figure out and understand the problems with you as a trusted partner, and so please reach out to us if that's the case. That's what
Thank you very much. Bears?
Yeah. What I would say is that private credit, the alternative investment space in the Caribbean and in Jamaica in particular, has definitely emerged over the last couple of years. And as a consequence, I believe that the solutions that we will offer to medium-sized firms and entrepreneurs seeking to grow their business to get out of the COVID environment even stronger. Private credit with more robust, more customized solutions, and I would say more flexible financing terms are certainly there to support your business. Sygnus, as we normally say to our clients, we are a long-term partner, and we work very closely with the entrepreneur to make sure that what we are doing is aligned with their objective. And ultimately, our view is that if we win, whether it's a crisis or a normal environment, the entrepreneur win. So we look forward to assisting businesses over the next couple of months to weather this storm.
Let's take the best for last.
Yeah.
I wouldn't quite say that, but you can go ahead, sir.
No, you can have the last here, man. Well, from our perspective, it's important that it's clear that we're taking a long view, and a long-term view on the economy and value creation, and that long-term view means that there has to be a little bit more risk that we're willing to take on as holders or managers, overseers of capital, right? So we want to be able to be in the space to help companies move, as I said, transition from startup to, we're not so much in the startup space, but from small to medium to large enterprise, and the key is for a person to understand that with our financing, it don't just come as just money, but it's a network, and how we can help use that network to transform the business you know, locally or even regionally. You have a lot of companies that are operating locally who certainly have a lot of potential and value, you know, that we can tap into. And so, you know, it's how we can help these companies realize those values and become, you know, regional entities, if that's part of the aspiration.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of it, you know, we just want to ensure that, you know, when you know 5 years on, when we're looking back, you know, our investments across, you know, directly in the entities or indirectly through our partnership with different fund managers, it actually helps with a better Jamaica. That's what we're trying to get.
Sounds good. So I mean, I think we've heard a lot from the panelists today, and I think if I was to try and put it together in you know, just one succinct sentence, you know, I think what I've heard is that it's certainly a great time to be a Jamaican or a Caribbean business. Our markets are very open. There are financing solutions available right along the continuum of risk appetite. You know, so there's space for the traditional debt. There's certainly space for private credit. There's, you know, a bit of private equity coming out as well. And, you know, especially during these time of unnatural markets, you know, it certainly behooves business owners to explore, you know, new alternative ways of financing. You know, you guys agree that that's a summation?
Yeah.
You know,
Very
so
good.
again, I just want to thank, you know, all the viewers for tuning in. You know, we hope that it was an engaging and stimulating session. You know, I certainly want to thank my panelists for coming and sharing of their time and their expertise. You know, and I hope we all took away at least one, you know, useful thing from today's session. Thank you.
All right.